The second I stepped into that ballroom, the air shifted, and I heard her voice cut through the noise like a serrated knife. Sloane Whitmore, my brother's perfect fiancée, leaned into her bridesmaids, clutching a champagne flute in her manicured hand. Her whisper was loud enough to echo. Oh, great. The trailer trash finally arrived. The trailer trash arrived. Her friends giggled like a pack of hyenas in designer gowns. Sloane didn't even bother to look at me when she said it. I was so insignificant to her, just an embarrassment that crawled out of a small town to ruin the perfect aesthetic of her engagement party. What Sloane didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I signed the deed to this hotel 3 years ago. The Monarch Hotel. Every chandelier above her head, every fork she used, every inch of Italian marble beneath her expensive heels belonged to me. And by the end of the night, that whisper was going to cost her everything she ever wanted. My name is Beth Barnes. I am 31 years old, and I grew up in Mill Creek, Pennsylvania. A town so small, the only traffic jam we ever had was when Old Man Henderson's cows escaped and blocked Main Street for 3 hours. I left home at 18 and never really looked back. Not because I hated where I came from, but because my family made it clear there was no room for me there. See, I have an older brother, Garrett, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, everything I did was measured against him, and I always came up short. If I got an A, Garrett got an A+. If I made the softball team, Garrett was the captain of the football team. My mother, Patricia, had a special way of looking at me that made me feel like a rough draft, while Garrett was the final masterpiece. So I left. I packed a suitcase, caught a bus to the city, and started with nothing but $200 and a stubborn refusal to fail. Everyone back home thought I was struggling. They pictured me in a tiny apartment eating instant ramen, which was true for the first 2 years. But what they didn't know was that I started as a housekeeper in a boutique hotel, and that job changed my life. I learned everything. I watched, I studied, I worked my way up from cleaning rooms to the front desk, from assistant manager to manager. I saved every penny. I invested carefully. I made smart moves and took risks when I had to. By 28, I owned my first property. By 30, I had 3. Now, at 31, I run Apex Hospitality, a company that owns 6 boutique hotels on the West Coast. The Monarch is my flagship, my pride and joy. But here is the truth about building something from nothing. You learn to stay quiet. You learn that people underestimating you is sometimes the most powerful weapon you have. That is why I never told my family anything. They never asked. To them, I was still the struggling little sister who could never compare to the king and his mid-level job at an insurance company. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Tonight, I received a pity invite to Garrett's engagement. Last minute, of course. Probably my mother's idea, just so she could tell her friends the whole family was present. I almost didn't go, but something pulled me here. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a stubborn little hope that things had changed. They hadn't. I stood in the entryway of my own hotel, wearing jeans and my favorite boots, my hair still smelling faintly of the ranch because I stopped by my barn on the way here, just to remind myself where I came from. My outfit probably cost more than everything Sloane was wearing put together, but you wouldn't know that just by looking. That is the thing about real money. It doesn't need to shout. And honestly, you can take the girl out of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the girl. Though you can certainly take the farm girl's money straight to the bank. I saw my mother across the room, holding court with some friends, probably bragging about Garrett's wonderful bride and the perfect future they would have together. Garrett was next to Sloane, looking like a man who had won the lottery. He had no idea he was holding a losing ticket. Sloane finally cast a glance my way, her smile sharp as a paper cut. She didn't recognize me as anything other than an inconvenience, a stain on her perfect night. That's fine. Let her think I'm a nobody. Let them all think that. I learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't loud. It is patient. It is quiet. It is watching people dig their own graves while they are too busy looking down their noses at you to notice the shovel in your hands. So, I smiled at Sloane, walked to the bar, and ordered a drink. My staff knew not to acknowledge me. Wesley Crane, my general manager, caught my eye from across the room and gave a slight nod. Everything was running smoothly. Everything was perfect for the takedown. Because in about 3 hours, Sloane Whitmore was going to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate the girl from the sticks, especially when she owns the floor you are standing on. The engagement party was exactly what you would expect from someone like Sloane. Extravagant, over the top, designed to impress people who were already impressed with themselves. There were ice sculptures shaped like swans, a champagne fountain that seemed excessive even by champagne fountain standards, and enough flowers to make a botanical garden jealous. My hotel staff had done an incredible job, which filled me with pride, even if I wanted to roll my eyes at every design choice Sloane had made. I took my drink and found a quiet spot to observe. That was when my mother found me. Patricia Barnes approached like someone who smelled something unpleasant and was trying to locate the source. She looked me up and down, her eyes stopping on my boots with evident disapproval. She said it was nice I could make it, but her tone suggested it really wasn't. Then she asked why I couldn't wear something more appropriate, mentioning that Sloane's family was very refined. She emphasized the word refined like it was a vocabulary word I needed to study. I said I came straight from work and didn't have time to change, which was true. I just didn't mention that work meant running a multi-million-dollar hospitality company. My mother sighed the way she always sighed at me, like I was a constant disappointment she had learned to tolerate. She told me to at least try to make a good impression on the Whitmores, and then she vanished back into the crowd to continue her social obligations. And there I was. 20 seconds of conversation, and I already felt like I was 12 years old, failing to meet some invisible standard I was never told about. I spotted Sloane across the room, handing out air kisses as she greeted a group of guests. That woman had kissed more cheeks that night than a politician at a county fair. Every gesture was calculated, every smile measured for maximum effect. Her parents, Franklin and Delilah Whitmore, stood nearby like proud peacocks, watching their precious hen work the room. Franklin was a large man, red-faced, with the typical confidence of someone who either has genuine success or is putting on an excellent performance. Delilah was thin, impeccable, dripping in jewelry that caught the light with every move. They looked rich, they acted rich, but something about them felt off, like a beautiful painting hanging slightly crooked. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but I would. Garrett finally noticed me and headed my way. My older brother, 3 years my senior, still looked at me like I was the annoying little sister tagging along. He said he was glad I came, though his tone showed he hadn't really noticed if I was there or not. He asked if I had met Sloane yet, and said she was amazing. I replied that I had seen her. I kept my opinions to myself. Garrett nodded, already looking past me to see who else he needed to greet. Some things never change. Then, he said something that twisted my stomach. He mentioned that Mom had given Sloane Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift. He said, wasn't that generous of her? And that Sloane loved it. I felt the air leave my lungs. Grandma's necklace. The antique pendant our grandmother had promised specifically to me before she passed. She had held my hand and said it was mine because I was her dreamer, her fighter, the one who would make something of her own life. My mother knew that. She was in the room when Grandma said it, and yet she gave the necklace to Sloane. I looked around the room, and there it was, hanging around Sloane's neck like it had always belonged there. My grandmother's necklace, my inheritance, my memory, shining under the chandelier lights while Sloane laughed at something someone said. The DJ turned the music up so loud I felt my fillings vibrating. If I wanted my teeth rattled, I could have gone straight to the dentist. At least there I would get a free toothbrush. I excused myself and headed toward the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. That was when I passed Franklin Whitmore in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, face tight with stress. He didn't see me. He was completely focused on the conversation. I heard him say they needed this wedding to happen, that the Barnes family had enough money to cover their situation. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Then he said they just needed to get through the ceremony, and after that, everything would be resolved. He hung up and went back to the party, plastering that salesman smile back onto his face like a mask. I stood in that hallway, frozen. My grandmother's necklace forgotten for a moment, replaced by something much more urgent. The Barnes family had money. What money? My parents had a nice house, sure, but I knew for a fact there was a second mortgage because I had been secretly paying it off for 4 years. Garrett had a decent job, nothing spectacular. There was no family fortune. So why did Franklin Whitmore think there was? And more importantly, what exactly was their situation that needed to be covered? I spent the next hour watching the Whitmores like a hawk watches a field mouse. Every smile, every handshake, every perfectly timed laugh. Now that I knew something was wrong, I could see the cracks in their performance. Franklin was checking his phone constantly, jaw clenching with every text read. Delilah's jewelry was impressive, but I noticed she was touching it nervously, like she was afraid it might vanish. And Sloane, the beautiful and perfect Sloane, had a hunger in her eyes that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with desperation. I started putting the pieces together. The Whitmores thought my family had money. But why? Then the penny dropped. For the last 4 years, I had been sending money to my parents anonymously through my company, Apex Hospitality. Every month, a payment arrived to cover the mortgage, the bills, the medical expenses. When my dad had his neck surgery, I paid for it. I never put my name on it. I didn't want gratitude or questions. I just wanted to help from a distance. But my parents didn't know it was me. And apparently, my mother decided it must be Garrett. Of course! In her head, the golden child was secretly taking care of them, being the responsible and successful son she always believed he was. I could practically hear her bragging to her friends about how generous Garrett was, how he always took care of the family, while the money I sent and the sacrifices I made were credited to him. The irony was so intense it could have walked into the party and ordered its own drink. So the Whitmores did their research. They saw a nice house with no visible mortgage payments. They heard Patricia bragging about her son's investments. They saw a family that appeared to have hidden wealth, and they zeroed in on Garrett like sharks sensing blood in the water. But that was the problem with their plan. The money wasn't Garrett's. There was no family fortune. The Whitmores were chasing a mirage, and when they found out the truth, my family would be left with nothing but the consequences. Unless someone intervened. I found Wesley Crane near the service entrance, clipboard in hand, supervising the catering team. He raised an eyebrow when I approached, and his professional mask slipped into a genuine expression of warmth when he saw it was me. He asked silently if everything was okay, calling me Ms. Barnes before I shot him a look. He corrected himself and called me just Beth. I told him I needed a favor. I needed information on the Whitmore family. Anything he could find, business records, news, whatever was available. Wesley didn't ask why, and that was what I admired about him. He just nodded and said he would see what he could dig up. He disappeared, phone already in hand. I went back to the party trying to act normal, which was getting harder by the minute. That was when Sloane found me. She appeared at my side like a ghost in designer silk, her smile sweet enough to cause cavities. She suggested we talk, just the two of us, to get to know each other better. She put her hand on my arm like we were old friends. I let her lead me to a quiet spot near the restrooms. As soon as we were out of earshot of the other guests, her smile vanished like it had never existed. She said she knew about me, that she knew I sent money to my family every month, pretending to be the good daughter from a distance. But there was something that confused her. She asked, Why would someone who could barely afford their own apartment send money to a family that doesn't even like her? I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. She continued. Unless, of course, I was trying to buy their love, trying to prove I was worth something. Pathetic, really, she said. She leaned in close and said I should know that Garrett tells her everything. How he was always ashamed of me. How he couldn't handle the fact that I wasn't the favorite. How the family only tolerated me out of pity. She smiled again, but this time the smile was sharp and cruel. She said she was marrying Garrett, becoming part of the family. And honestly, she thought it would be better for everyone if I just stayed away. No one would miss me. She called me dead weight, patted my arm like she was comforting a child, and walked away. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Sloane thought I was broke. She thought the money came from Garrett. She had no idea who I really was. It was like watching someone brag about a stolen car to the person who owns the dealership. Honestly, if arrogance burned calories, Sloane Whitmore would be invisible. Wesley appeared at my side, pulling me out of my thoughts. He handed me a folder and told me I needed to see this. His face was pale, his usual composure shaken. He said the Whitmores weren't just in debt, they were being investigated for fraud. I opened the folder right there in the hallway, scanning the documents. Financial records, lawsuits, newspaper articles. The more I read, the colder I felt. The Whitmores were not who they said they were. Their real estate empire was a house of cards built on lies and other people's money. They were 6 months away from bankruptcy and a federal indictment. That wedding wasn't about love. It was an escape plan. I took the folder out to my car in the garage, needing privacy to process what I was reading. The overhead lights flickered like they were shocked too. The documents showed an ugly scenario. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore had been running a Ponzi scheme for years. They collected money from investors for real estate developments that either didn't exist or were absurdly overpriced. Early investors were paid with money from later investors, the classic scam. But the house of cards was finally collapsing. Investors were asking questions. Auditors were circling. Federal investigators had opened a case. The Whitmores needed an exit strategy, and fast. Enter my brother Garrett. I could see their logic, twisted as it was. Find a family that seemed to have money, marry into it, use the connection to bolster their ruined reputation, or at least have a place to hide when everything fell apart. They probably planned to drain whatever assets my family had before vanishing to start the con somewhere else. What they didn't realize was that my family had nothing. The house was mortgaged. Garrett's salary was average. The only money flowing into the Barnes household came from me, and I could cut that off with a single phone call. The Whitmores were about to discover they had picked the wrong family. And when they found out, they would dump Garrett faster than a sinking ship, leaving my brother heartbroken and my parents humiliated. Part of me wanted to let it happen. Let them all suffer the consequences of their choices. My mother, who gave away my inheritance without a second thought. My brother, who never stood up for me. Let them feel what it is like to be discarded, ignored, cast aside. But I couldn't do that. As much as they had hurt me, they were still my family. Garrett was still the boy who taught me to ride a bike, even if he had forgotten that somewhere along the way. My mother was still the woman who stayed up all night when I had chickenpox, even after deciding I wasn't worth remembering. Family is complicated. You can love someone and be furious with them at the same time. You can want to protect them even when they don't deserve it. So, I made a decision. I was going to expose the Whitmores. I was going to save my family from a disaster they didn't even imagine was coming, and I was going to do it my way. I called my lawyer first. Rebecca Thornton picked up on the second ring, even though it was 8 p.m., and that is why I paid her what I paid her. I summarized the situation and asked how quickly she could verify the information in the folder. She said she would have confirmation within an hour. Next, I called Naomi Delaney, a forensic accountant I worked with on a complicated acquisition 2 years ago. Naomi was a wizard with financial records, the type who looks at a spreadsheet and can tell you what someone had for breakfast. I sent photos of the main documents and asked her to dig deeper. Naomi called me back in 40 minutes. Her voice was tense, excited, like someone who had found something big. She said I was right. They were running a Ponzi scheme, textbook. But here is the interesting part. She said she investigated the Whitmore name and found something in Arizona from 3 years ago. Same pattern, same scheme, different names. She said the bride's real name wasn't Sloan. She asked if I was ready to hear it. I said yes. Naomi told me the bride's real name was Sandra Williams. That her parents weren't her real parents. They were partners in a long con, and they had been doing this for at least a decade. Different identities, different targets, same game. I sat in the car, the folder on my lap, and started to laugh. I couldn't help it. These people had more identities than a Hollywood actress has husbands. Sandra, Sloan, probably planning to be Stephanie next year. My phone buzzed with a message from Garrett. I stared at it for a long moment before opening. He wanted to know if we could talk. He said something about Sloan didn't feel right. I looked at my watch. 5 minutes to 9 p.m. When Franklin Whitmore was scheduled to make the big welcome toast to the family. Too little, too late, brother. You should have trusted that gut feeling an hour ago. You should have trusted me years ago. But better late than never. At least he was starting to see through the mask. I got out of the car and walked back to the hotel. The night air in Arizona was hot, and somewhere inside, a grifter in a white dress was about to have the worst night of her life. Time to crash an engagement. I returned to the Monarch Hotel with a totally different energy than when I left. Before, I was the invisible sister, the trailer trash they all looked down on. Now, I was a woman with a plan. Wesley found me near the service entrance. His expression was a mix of worry and curiosity. He said he had been watching the Whitmores all night and that something was definitely wrong with them. He mentioned Franklin had made 4 calls in the last hour, each one leaving him more agitated than the last. I told Wesley I needed the audio and video system ready, that during Franklin's toast at 9 p.m. we were going to give the guests a presentation they would never forget. Wesley didn't even blink. He asked what kind of presentation it was. I handed him a flash drive. On it were scanned copies of the most damning documents from the folder, plus everything Naomi had sent me. Court records from Arizona, financial statements showing the fraud, photos of Sloan from 3 years ago with her real name, Sandra Williams, and a trail of lies that stretched back a decade. I told him that when Franklin started the toast, I wanted everything up on the screens, every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. Wesley took the drive with a slight smile. He said he always knew working for me would be interesting, but this was something else entirely. Then he disappeared toward the control room. My phone buzzed. Rebecca, my lawyer, confirming everything Naomi had found. The Whitmores were indeed under federal investigation. More importantly, she had connected with the lead investigator, a woman named Agent Carla Reeves, who had been trying to track down the Whitmores for months. They kept moving, changing names, always one step ahead, until today. Rebecca said Agent Reeves was already on her way with the team. They would be outside the hotel at 9:15 p.m., ready to move as soon as the evidence was exposed. Everything was falling into place. The trap was set. Now I just needed to wait. I found a spot at the back of the room where I could see everything without being noticed. Sloan was circulating through the room again, that fake smile plastered on her face like paint. Garrett was by her side, playing the role of the perfect fiancé, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire future was about to crumble. My mother was near the front, chatting with Delilah Whitmore like they were old friends. 2 women who had nothing in common besides the ability to make me feel useless. Soon, one of them would realize she had been scammed. The other would realize she had pushed away the wrong daughter. I checked my watch. 8:52 p.m. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Garrett. He asked where I was and said he really needed to talk. He commented that something about the Whitmores was bothering him. The way Franklin constantly disappeared, the way Sloane dodged every question about her past. He said maybe he was being paranoid. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to reply to say he should trust his instincts, warn him about what was coming. But what would that solve? He had 34 years to trust me, to include me, to treat me like family. He chose not to do that. Besides, if I warned him now, he might tip off Sloane, and I couldn't take that risk. I typed a simple reply. I said we would talk after the toast and for him to just wait. 8:56 p.m. Franklin Whitmore adjusted his tie near the small stage where the DJ was set up. He looked confident again, the salesman mask firmly in place. He had no idea what was coming. I thought about what Sloane had told me earlier, that I was dead weight, that no one would miss me, that I should just stay away. Funny thing about people who underestimate you is that they never see you coming. They are so busy looking down that they miss the moment you stand up. 8:59 p.m. Franklin walked onto the stage and took the microphone. The DJ lowered the music. The guests turned to face him, champagne flutes in hand, ready to toast the happy couple. I exchanged a look with Wesley across the room. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. The screens behind the stage lit up, currently showing a slideshow of photos of Garrett and Sloane. Happy couple at a restaurant. Happy couple on the beach. Happy couple living their happy lie. Not for much longer. Franklin cleared his throat and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," he said. "Thank you for being here to celebrate this beautiful union." He recounted that when his daughter brought Garrett home for the first time, he knew immediately that young man was special. I almost laughed. His daughter, the daughter who wasn't his daughter, the daughter whose real name he probably had to remind himself of every morning. Franklin continued talking about family, legacy, about how the Whitmores were honored to join the Barnes family. He spoke about bright futures, grandchildren, and building something lasting together. Every word was a lie, and every lie was about to be exposed. Franklin raised his glass. "To love, to family, to forever," he said to the happy couple. I pulled out my phone and sent Wesley a single word. Now. The screens flickered. For a moment, everyone probably thought it was a technical glitch. The happy photos of Garrett and Sloane vanished, replaced by something completely different. An official document, stamped with court seals and legal terminology. Franklin's smile froze on his face. The document was an indictment from Arizona, dated 3 years ago, a fraud investigation. And there, listed as a person of interest, was a name no one in that room had heard before. Sandra Williams. A murmur ran through the crowd. People squinted at the screens, trying to understand what they were seeing. Franklin shifted awkwardly at the microphone, his face going from red to pale in seconds. "There must be some mistake," he said, calling it a technical error. He turned to the AV booth and yelled for someone to fix it, but the screens kept changing. Another document appeared, financial records showing investor money being funneled into shell companies. Next, newspaper articles about a real estate scheme in Phoenix that cost dozens of families their life savings. Then photos. A younger Sandra Williams. Different hair color, same cold eyes, standing next to Franklin and Delilah at some charity event, using completely different names. Sloane stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, the champagne flute trembling in her hand. For the first time all night, her mask had slipped completely. She looked terrified. Garrett looked at the screens, then at Sloane, then back at the screens. I could see his mind working, the pieces fitting together. The doubt he had felt all night making horrible sense. Franklin tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but 2 security guards from my team blocked his path. Delilah grabbed his arm, whispering frantically, but there was nowhere to go. That was when I stepped forward. I walked through the parting crowd toward the stage, my boots clicking on the marble. Every eye in the room turned to me. The trailer trash. The nobody. the dead weight. Wesley's voice boomed over the speakers, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the owner of the Monarch Hotel and the CEO of Apex Hospitality. Please welcome Ms. Beth Barnes. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went white. Garrett's jaw literally dropped. Even Sloane, in the middle of her panic, looked genuinely shocked. I took the microphone from Franklin's limp hand. "Good evening, everyone," I said. "Sorry for the interruption, but I thought you all might want to know who you were really celebrating tonight." I pointed to the screens behind me. Franklin and Delilah Whitmore are not who they say they are. Their real estate empire is a fraud. Their wealth was stolen from innocent investors, and their daughter, Sloane, is actually named Sandra Williams, a con artist who has been running the same scheme for over a decade. Finally, Sloane found her voice. She screamed that I was lying and called me jealous, pathetic, and a nobody. She said I was making it all up because I couldn't stand seeing Garrett happy. I smiled at her. "Interesting," I said. "And do you think I also made up the federal investigation that has been tracking you for 2 years? The arrest warrants issued last month in Arizona. And I'm curious how I would have faked the fact that Agent Carla Reeves and her team are, at this exact moment, waiting outside this hotel." As if by magic, the ballroom doors opened. 4 people in suits entered, badges visible, expressions totally professional. Sloane's face crumbled. Franklin tried to run. He managed to make it about 10 feet before Agent Reeves intercepted him with a firm, calm hand on his shoulder. She stated that Franklin Whitmore, or whatever his real name was under arrest for wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy. Delilah started to cry, mascara running down her carefully made-up face. She repeated over and over that there was a mistake, that they could explain everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. Sloane, Sandra, whatever her name was, turned to Garrett one last time. Her voice was desperate, pleading. She asked if he would really let his sister do this to them. She said they loved each other and that he needed to believe her. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. I could see the war happening behind his eyes, the woman he thought he loved versus the evidence he couldn't deny. Then he did something I never expected. He stepped away from her. "I don't even know who you are," he said. His voice was low, broken, but firm. "I don't know who any of you are." Sloane's expression shifted from desperation to rage in an instant. She lunged in my direction, screaming that I had destroyed everything, that I was supposed to be a nobody, just dirty trailer trash. Security intercepted her before she got within 5 feet of me. I leaned in close enough so only she could hear me. "This trailer trash owns the floor you're standing on, pays the salary of everyone about to escort you out, and is going to sleep very well tonight knowing exactly who she is." They dragged her out screaming, her designer dress crumpled, her perfect hair ruined, her entire carefully constructed life falling apart with every step. I turned to the stunned crowd, most still trying to process what had just happened. "Well, the steak service is already paid for, and it would be a shame to waste good food," I said. "The bar will remain open for anyone who wants to stay." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. The DJ, bless him, started playing something upbeat. The engagement party was over, but the night was just beginning. The next hour felt like coming out of a fever dream. The Whitmores, all 3 of them, were escorted out in handcuffs while the remaining guests watched in stunned silence. Sloane, Sandra, or whatever her next alias would be, was still shouting threats as they put her in the back of an unmarked car. Something about lawyers, lawsuits, revenge. Empty words from an empty person. She went from future Mrs. Barnes to future inmate in less than 15 minutes. And that had to be some kind of record, even for a professional grifter. Inside the ballroom, the mood had shifted from shock to something else. Curiosity, maybe fascination. Some guests were already on their phones, probably sharing with everyone they knew what had just happened. By morning, this story would be all over town. Garrett found me near the bar. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare, only to realize he was still dreaming. His eyes were red, his hands shaking, his entire worldview clearly shattered. He asked how I knew. His voice tripped over the words. He asked how I found out. I told him I listened, that I watched, that I paid attention. All the things I had been doing my whole life while everyone else ignored me. He stood in silence for a moment. Then he said he was sorry, that he knew it didn't fix anything, that it didn't make up for years of treating me like an afterthought, but that he was sorry. I studied my brother's face, looking for a trap, some hidden motive, but all I saw was genuine regret. Maybe for the first time in our lives, I told him his apology was a start. We stood there in silence. Two siblings who spent decades as strangers, finally seeing each other clearly. Then my mother appeared. Patricia Barnes looked smaller somehow, as if the night's events had physically diminished her. She approached slowly, uncertainly, without any of her usual confidence on display. She started to say she didn't know, but I cut her off. I took out my phone and showed her the screen. Bank records, transfer proofs, 4 years of payments to her mortgage company, the utility bills, the medical expenses, all from Apex Hospitality, all done by me. I told her she thought Garrett was supporting them. I told her she bragged to everyone about her generous, successful son. I let that hang in the air for a moment before saying, "It was me. It was always me." My mother looked at the phone, then at me, and back at the phone. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. I said I didn't do it for credit. I said I did it because they were my family, even when they made me feel like I wasn't theirs, but that I thought she needed to know the truth about who was really there for her. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Not those dramatic, performative tears I had seen her use at family events, but real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep. She whispered my name, Beth, like she was saying it for the first time. Before I could respond, there was a commotion near the dance floor. I turned and saw Grandma's necklace, Sloane's necklace, my necklace, lying on the floor where Sloane had dropped it during her meltdown. Garrett walked over and picked it up carefully, as if it might break. He looked at it for a long moment, and then came back to me. "This should have always been yours," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know Mom gave it away. I'm sorry." He placed the necklace in my hand. Its weight felt right, like something that had been missing for years, finally back where it belonged. My mom watched the exchange, tears streaming down her face. She said she had been so wrong about everything. I didn't disagree with her, but I didn't rub it in either. There would be time for difficult conversations later. Right now, I was just tired. A guest approached and asked if the party was still happening. Confused, but hopeful. I looked around the room. The ice sculptures were melting, the champagne fountain was still bubbling. Half the guests were gone, but the other half seemed determined to take advantage of the open bar. I shrugged and signaled the DJ to keep playing. Whatever. The night had already been weird enough. A little dancing wouldn't hurt. 3 weeks later, I was in my office at the Monarch Hotel, looking out at the city skyline. The morning sun streamed through the windows, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. The Whitmores were done. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to charge them with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Sandra Williams, the woman who called me trailer trash, was in custody awaiting trial. Her bail was set so high, not even her fake rich parents could pay it. Turns out, when you spend decades stealing from people, you don't have many friends willing to bail you out when things go south. The story ran on the local news for about a week. Hotel mogul exposes grifters at family engagement party. One headline even called me the trailer trash who owned the room. I kept that headline framed. It hangs in my office today, where I can see it every morning. Garrett visited me at the hotel yesterday. It was the first time he saw my office, my team, the life I built without anyone's help. He walked around touching things like he couldn't believe they were real. He said he spent years thinking he knew me, that he was wrong about everything. I said we had a lot of years to make up for, and I suggested maybe we start now. We went to lunch, a real lunch, not a family obligation with superficial conversation. We talked for real about our childhood, about our parents, about all the things we never said to each other. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was honest. That was already more than we had before. My mother started therapy last week. She called me, voice quiet and uncertain, so different from the woman who used to make me feel like a constant disappointment. She said she wanted to understand why she treated me that way, that she wanted to be better. I said I appreciated that we could take it slow, and we would. Rebuilding trust takes time. But at least we were finally building something instead of just watching it collapse. This morning, I was hosting a business breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Investors, partners, people interested in expansion opportunities, normal stuff for a normal day. A young woman walked in, visibly nervous. She was wearing simple clothes, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes darting around the fancy setting, clearly out of her element. One of my investors, a man named Gerald, who had too much money and too little manners, made a comment loud enough for everyone to hear. He asked who let her in and said this was a private event. I stood up from the table. I walked over to the young woman and extended my hand. I called her by name, Nicole, warmly, and told her I was so happy she made it. Everyone, I want you to meet Nicole Patterson, this year's Apex Hospitality Scholarship winner. I told them she grew up in a small town in Ohio, worked 2 jobs to put herself through community college, and was about to start Cornell's hospitality management program in the fall. The room went silent. Gerald suddenly found his coffee very interesting. I led Nicole to a seat at my table, the same table as the investors, the same table as the people who thought they were better than her because of money and connections. She whispered a thank you, visibly emotional. I told her not to thank me yet. The real work was just beginning. But I added, if you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, remember this. The people who build the most beautiful things usually start with nothing but stubbornness and dreams. She smiled. After breakfast, I stayed in the hotel lobby, watching guests come and go. Businessmen, tourists, families, all walking on floors I owned, sleeping in beds I paid for, completely oblivious to the woman who made it all possible. And that's fine. I didn't need them to know. People will always try to make you feel small because of where you come from. Let them try. While they are busy looking down, they won't see you rising. I learned that lesson a long time ago, in a small town where I was never good enough, never pretty enough, never enough of anything. I carried that shame through years of struggle, doubt, and people saying I would never go anywhere. And now, here I was, in my hotel, surrounded by everything I built. The trailer trash. She could smell success from a mile away. It turns out that where you come from does not define where you are going, but it sure determines how hard you fight to get there. Family is messy. Forgiveness is expensive. But living your truth is priceless. While this story is a work of fiction inspired by the real struggles many of us face, the lesson remains as solid as the ground we stand on. Never let anyone treat you like a guest in the house you built. And never apologize for the dirt on your boots when you are the one who bought the land.